Mother and Child, from Goblin Tales of Lancaster, by James Bowker, FRGSI. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Dale Grothman. Mother and Child, by James Bowker. The tenants of Plimpton Hall had retired to rest somewhat earlier than was their wont, for it was the last night of November. The old, low rooms were in darkness, and all was silent as a grave, for though the residents, unfortunately for themselves, were not asleep, they held their breath, and awaited in fear the first stroke of the hour from the old clock in the kitchen. Suddenly, the sound of hurried footsteps broke the silence. But with sighs of relief, the terrified listeners found that the noise was made by a belated wayfarer, almost out of his wits with fright, but who was unable to avoid passing the hall, and who therefore ran by the haunted building as quickly as his legs would carry him. The sensation of escape, however, was of but short duration, for the hammer commenced to strike, and no sooner had the last stroke of 11 startled the echoes than loud thuds, as of a heavy object bumping upon the stairs, were heard. The quaking occupants of the chambers hid their heads beneath the bedclothes, for they knew that an old-fashioned oak chair was on its way down the noble staircase, and was sliding from step to step as though dragged along by an invisible being who had only one hand at liberty. If anyone had dared to follow that chair across the wide passage and into the wainscoted parlor, he would have been startled by the sight of a fire blazing in the grate, whence, ere the servants retired, even the very embers had been removed, and in the chair the marvelous movement of which had so frightened all the inmates of the hall, he would have seen a beautiful woman seated, with an infant at her breast. Year after year, on wild nights when the snow was driven against the diamond panes, and the cry of the spirits of the storm came up from the sea, the weird firelight shone from the haunted room, and through the house sounded a mysterious crooning, as the unearthly visitor softly sang a lullaby to her infant. Lads grew into gray-haired men in the old house, and from youth to manhood, on the last night of each November, they had heard the notes, but none of them ever had caught, even when custom had somewhat deadened the terror which surrounded the events of the much-dreaded anniversary, the words of the song the ghostly woman sang. The maids, too, had always found the grate as it was left before the visit. Not a cinder or a speck of dust remained to tell of the strange fire, and no one had ever heard the chair ascend the stairs. Chair and fire and child and mother, however, were seen by many a weary wayfarer, drawn to the house by the hospitable look of the window, through which a genial glow of the burning logs shone forth into the night, but who, by tapping at the pane and crying for shelter, could not attract the attention of the pale nurse, clad in a quaint old costume with lace ruff and ruffles, and singing a mournful and melodious lullaby to the child resting upon her beautiful bosom. Tradition tells of one of these wanderers, a footsore and miserable seafaring man on the tramp, who, attracted by the welcome glare, crept to the panes, and seeing the cozy-looking fire, and the Madonna-faced mother tenderly nursing her infant, rapped at the glass, and begged for a morsel of food and permission to sleep in the hayloft. And finding his pleadings unanswered, loudly cursed the woman who could sit and enjoy warmth and comfort and turn a deaf ear to the prayers of the homeless and hungry, upon which the seated figure turned the weird light of its wild eyes upon him and almost changed him to stone. A laborer, going to his daily toil in the early morn, finding the poor wretch gazing fixedly through the window, against which his terror-stricken face was closely pressed, his hair turned white by fear, and his fingers convulsively clutching the casement. End of Mother and Child by James Bowker.